The movie begins in Torgus Valley, California, in the year 1933, where Mr. Bolton, president of the Growers Association, calls the attention of a crowd of fruit pickers to announce the cut of their wages from $3 to $1. The group complainingly asks for the sudden changes and desires to leave the field to search for other work. However, Bolton demands them to stay and work instead of whining and going. Sometime later, Jim Nolan meets Joy, a drunken old man associated with his dead father, Ray Nolan. Joy introduces Jim to Mac, and they converse about Ray and their resistance group. Mac initiates Jim to join their group and invites him tomorrow morning to Torgus Valley to encourage the fruit pickers to resist working under Growers Association. The next day, Jim and Mac ride a train to Torgus Valley, wearing fruit pickers attire. Mac asks Jim why he instantly agrees to join their group. In response, Jim desires to continue what his late father is fighting for. As they arrive at the Bolton Orchard Field in Torgus Valley, Bolton's foreman, Frank, swiftly gives them a tour in their fruit-picking job. Conversely, Mac tells Jim to enlighten the fruit pickers about their group and plan for a strike. After that, Jim starts picking apples on trees while chatting with the fruit pickers nearby. As their working time ends, Frank shows Jim and Mac their bunk, where they'll stay together with other fruit pickers. He warns them they will be evicted if they cause trouble with other fruit pickers. The following day, Mac approaches London, the toughest fruit picker in the field, to convince him to join his group and strike. However, London does not want to get involved with his scheme. The same goes for Jim, who approaches Dan, an old fruit picker, to persuade him to strike. However, Dan does not want to get involved, either. At night, Lisa, London's daughter-in-law, is about to give birth to her son. Mac professes to be a doctor capable of delivering a baby with no doctor in the room. London undoubtedly trusts him and allows him to have the baby. Successfully, the baby is safe and sound. Due to the successful operation, Mac uses it to pressure London again about the strike. London attempts to consider his scheme, yet, other fruit pickers stop him as they grow frightened of what will happen if they participate. Later that day, the usual fruit picking work begins. Dan, about to climb the ladder, falls from a rotten step and breaks his back. Initially, the fruit pickers rush to check up on him and argue with Frank for providing a rotten ladder. They all beat Frank but are swiftly halted by Jim. With Dan's accident, turmoil against the Growers Association occurs to the fruit pickers. Mac convinces them to strike, yet they ask him for his aim. In a distressing response, Mac tells them about Jim's father's death for resisting the rotten system. As the fruit pickers grow persuaded by Jim's father's sympathetic story, they start wanting to strike. The fruit pickers decide to put London in charge. London accepts the role immediately. Afterward, London asks Mac where they'll stay once they leave the field. Mac devises a plan to find a place for all of them to stay. The following day, Jim and Mac head to Al's diner to meet Alfred. They ask him about his father's farm and persuade him to bring them to him. Later on, they arrive at Al's house. Al, Alfred's father, tours them to his farm and orchard. Mac persuades him to take hundreds of fruit pickers on his land to camp once they begin their strike tomorrow morning. In addition, the fruit pickers will pick his apple fruits for free so he can sell them to the market. Al accepts the deal. The next day, the fruit pickers leave the field to head to Al's farm. On their way, they encounter scabs on the train to replace them from their former job. London, now a leader of the fruit pickers, convinces the scabs to join their strike. Joy, on the train with the scabs, goes down to agree with London's firm persuasion. With all the attention from scabs and fruit pickers on Joy, Joy mocks the cops watching them and those businessmen mistreating them. As he keeps criticizing the higher authorities and businessmen, an assailant shoots him 2 times, eventually making him fall dead. Mac shares his speech about Joy in front of the fruit pickers to commemorate Joy's bravery with the cost of his death. With Joy's death, the fruit pickers remain firm in their decision to strike and not back out. On their first day of the strike, they start building tents on Al's farm. Edie, a member of the resistance group, brings supplies to the fruit pickers. Dr. Burton, hired by Mac, is in charge of health and sanitation on the farm. All is going well on their first day. They picket against the $1 wage daily and gather more scabs to join their strike. Doubtful about the strike, Lisa believes that the strike will not end well. Jim convinces her to be optimistic as their plan will work well sooner or later. Later that day, Bolton, his daughter Alice and the foreman arrive at Al's farm to meet with London. Bolton desires to negotiate with London to return to the farm in exchange for $1.20 wage a day. London grows furious as it is not what they asked for. When London rejects the offer, Bolton leaves and threatens him and the fruit pickers that he'll force them out of the farm soon. 14 days later, the fruit pickers all feel despondent due to insufficient supplies and money to buy necessities. Edie arrives to show Mac the newspaper containing the information about the old trick of Growers Association to feed the strikers in exchange for them returning to the field for work. So, Mac decides to take action to prolong the strike. At night, Mac and Jim head to the nearby town to meet their ally. However, on their way to their meeting place, Frank, pointing his rifle at them, orders them to walk straight on the road. Mac stops and begins mocking Frank. He headbutts Frank and swiftly flees the scene with Jim to hide. Frank shoutingly threatens to take revenge on one of their allies, Alfred. After that, Frank throws a Molotov cocktail at Al's diner to start lighting the diner on fire. As the fire spreads to the restaurant, Alfred panically exits the door and gets beat up by Frank and other conspirators. Later that night at Al's farm, Mac and Jim return to witness Alfred lying on a couch, beaten and wounded. Mac sincerely apologizes for what has happened to Alfred, whereas Al expresses his anger towards Mac. On the other hand, Jim grows guilty seeing Alfred's situation caused by their trigger on Frank. Mac ascertains to Jim that they're not responsible for Alfred's state. He tells him not to take the blame, believing that their goal will be accomplished soon. Morning comes, and London grows discouraged, letting the strike slowly fall apart. Vera, his daughter, encourages him to prepare the fruit pickers to fight Bolton and his men. On the 28th day of the strike, the fruit pickers are discouraged and hopeless about their strike. They suffer from low supplies, thirst, hunger, boredom, and cold. Later on, the fruit pickers gather to converse about their hardships over the past few days. They start spreading rumors about more scabs coming to the farm and London being an unreliable leader. Jim, eavesdropping, grows furious and forces them to disperse and not make false accusations against London. At night, Jim rewinds Dan's fall from the rotten ladder. He confronts Mac about it, then Mac confesses to sabotaging the ladder to cause an uproar from the fruit pickers. Jim grows mad at Mac, yet Mac believes his action leads them to have the strike they desire for. The following day, Edie finds out that Bolton and his men discover that Mac and Jim are the ringleaders of the strike. Edie persuades Mac to set up Jim to take the fall once the strike does not end well for them. Mac grows furious at Edie's plan and decides to take the fall once they fail later on. After that, the fruit pickers call their attention to come with them to confront Bolton's men for setting barricades on their road. They gather sharp tools at Bolton's men start a war against them. As they all whistle and march to Bolton's men's post, they get disrupted by the tear gas thrown at them. They all cough and heavily breathe from the smoke. Due to that, they immediately retreat to plan their next move. Firmly, Mac desires to go back to drive away Bolton's men. He orders the fruit pickers for their cooperation but has yet to receive a response. He furiously drags them to come with him but is restrained by London for doing so. Losing hope, Burke, one of the fruit pickers, stands up and exasperatedly expresses his anger towards Mac in front of all the fruit pickers. He blames Mac for starting the failed strike, and all the fruit pickers agree. London arrives and furiously punches him in the face for mocking Mac and him. Then, Jim comes in and stands up to persuade the fruit pickers to not give up. Convinced, the fruit pickers concur and chant with him. Jim tells them to drive away those foremen again using an antique truck they have on the farm. Afterward, they drive the antique truck toward the barricade on the road. Frank shoots at the truck but fails to target the driver. The truck goes through the barrier, and the fruit pickers manage to shoo away Bolton's men. Consequently, Jim and the fruit pickers rejoice. Meanwhile, Vinny, one of the fruit pickers, conspired with Alice and a foreman to burn Al's barn containing all the apples collected by the fruit pickers. In exchange for this, Vinny is promised a stable job after the plan is executed well. At night, Alice seduces Keller, the guard on duty at the barn. As they leave the barn, Vinny secretly enters it to pour gas all over the apples. He lights the match and throws it at the apples, which eventually causes the fire. Instantly, the barn burned down and alerted all the fruit pickers. In a panic, all the fruit pickers rush to the barn. In contrast, London furiously confronts Keller, who's supposedly guarding the barn. London shouts angrily and orders Keller to search for the assailant who caused the fire. On the other hand, Al expresses deep distress watching his barn light on fire. He leaves the fruit pickers without uttering any words to them. In wrath, Vera devises a plan to take revenge against Bolton and his men as she assumes they're the ones who schemed the fire. Consequently, Vera arrives at Bolton's house and swiftly pours gasoline on the whole place. She throws a Molotov cocktail at the house and sets it on fire. Bolton's family weepingly rushes outside the house to save themselves. The following day, Al tells Mac that he reported the incident to the cops and orders the fruit pickers to leave his farm the next thing in the morning. If they fail to leave, they'll be arrested by the cops for trespassing on his private property. At night, the fruit pickers vote if they'll stay and fight the cops coming tomorrow or just leave the farm and scatter. They argue all night without having time to vote their final decision. Meanwhile, a young boy breathes heavily as he rushes to meet Jim in his tent. He informs him about Dr. Burton being wounded and lying in the orchard. He tells him that he must go to the orchard immediately. Swiftly, Jim notifies Mac about it. Mac, knowing it's a trap, goes to the orchard alone. He orders Jim to meet Edie due to some business they need to discuss. As Jim rushes to meet Edie, Edie is unaware of the business they need to tackle. In confusion, Jim assumes Mac deceives him to save him from the trap. In a panic, Jim rushes to the orchard to search for Mac. As he arrives, Dr. Burton is nowhere to be found, and he sees only Mac's blood. As the fruit pickers argue, Jim weepingly comes while carrying Mac's dead body. The fruit pickers go speechless as they see Mac dead. Later on, they all gather to commemorate Mac's death. They hear Jim's eulogy and persuasive speech about fighting the Growers Association again. They all come to terms to continue picketing and fighting for what's right. The movie ends when morning comes, and the fruit pickers pickets their way out of the farm and continue to strike in response to the Growers Association's grievance. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more videos like this to help the channel out. Have a nice day.